recording. There we go. All right. So we've talked about feedback, and I'm hoping that you're still doing that. And I've given you the 5 conversations framework, and it's an opportunity to develop good conversations with in a one-on-one setup. I looked at conflict last week, and you'd be aware there are 5 different ways, and we looked at some case studies. I think with managing facilitating great meetings, I think you might say, well, why am I including this in better leadership conversations? And I think the reason is that I believe that good meetings are conversations. That is between the person running the meeting and everyone that's there. And that's often not the case. So that's why I've included it in the program. Just finished writing a book called Mastering Meetings. So anyway, a lot of those things will come up. That's the model from last week. I don't know if you've had any comment, any reflections on that, and you've got an opportunity to complete that profile. The whole argument about all this is that you've got plenty of options when you're dealing with any sort of conflict. And the point is, if option 1 isn't working, it doesn't mean it's the end of it. It just means I've got to try something else. And I think if you are prepared to try more than one of those 5, which might be your preferred approach, it's likely that you'll get a better result. So that was what that was all about. Any comment, Gary or Jareen, around the issue around conflict? I mean, conflict doesn't have to be a negative thing. It could be just a difference of viewpoint or whatever. But any comment in terms of your own work or the profile you did, or what you've noticed in the workplace?
I think I really didn't get a chance to practice it last week, but there was probably one situation, and I did what my profile was, which was to avoid it. So
Yeah.
I think I probably, I don't know, in my mind, because you don't know when that conflict's going to occur sometimes. Like, it's
That's
just in a
right.
conversation, and kind of having the confidence to be ready to know which kind of option you go with. I feel like I need to, I don't know, either practice that or kind of, have that in my head a lot more, quicker than I was. So I did back to my old avoidance of it, and need to come back to it.
Yeah. Look, my experience is that a lot of people avoid conflict when they perhaps shouldn't. But I think you'll get a gut feel about that. And I think the only thing you can do is say, okay, well, I wonder, when you walk away from something where you might have avoided it, just say, well, was that the right approach? Or perhaps, and of course, you can always go back. So the more, I think what this is trying to do, Jareen, is just say, well, you've got options, and just to be a little self-reflective when those situations arise, and ask yourself, well, is that actually the effective way of dealing with it? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it is right, because we're all people. We can't get involved in everything. So in some cases, remember, I suppose the test is, if it's not important and it's not, or the other kind of thing might be, do I need to buy myself some time here to think about what I'm going to say? And that's avoiding, but you're still coming back to them eventually. So anyway, it's a model. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, on reflection, I didn't avoid it. I did say, no, we're not going to do that. But then they've come back to me. So it's so obviously that was the wrong approach to be. That's not, and I'm still, my position is still no. So it's just kind of then perhaps presenting that in a different way.
And I think just a bit of insight for you, Jareen. I think sometimes, if the people that you work with probably are familiar with your approach to dealing with conflict, not in terms of the model, but they just know how to deal with you. And they might be thinking, okay, if I push a bit harder here, I might get my own way. So sometimes when we avoid, we set up a sort of an expectation that, okay, if I push a bit harder, I might get what I want. So, and then of course you can still say no, as you 100% right. But
good thing about avoiding, sorry, Tim, the good thing about avoiding, there's so many different angles you can come from with avoiding. I found myself between collaborating and avoiding on a number of questions, strange enough. And it all depends how you read the question, what the actual subject is. If you avoid it, you buy more time.
Yes.
If you avoid it, you buy them more time to let them think about it a bit more.
Yes.
So I think you're spot on. I think that avoiding type practice can be very effective and very strong.
Yes. And I'm not sure, Jareen, that you did avoid in that case, because I would have said it was more competing, maybe gently, but you still said no.
Sounds like it started that way,
It's just that they didn't get the message.
That's
the point, isn't it?
Yeah, my no wasn't as strong as it could have been, perhaps.
Yes. And I think, here's a little tip for you both. And I've found this, and I do it myself sometimes, unfortunately. But when you say no, try not to apologize for saying no. You can apologize for the inconvenience it might cause the other person. But the truth of the matter is, if you say no and you apologize, then you're almost saying, well, if you push a bit harder, I might cave in. So it doesn't have to be aggressive, but it might work. So the first words to come out of your mouth should be no, and give the reason for it. And then you can do the soft stuff where you can say, look, I realize this is important to you, but it's not going to happen. So in other words, that's where the sort of empathy comes in. You see what I mean? Because sometimes when we say sorry, no, you can imagine how the other person might. I know why we do it. I do it sometimes too, and it's trying to make it nice and trying to soften the blow. But if you mean no, you mean no. But you can still then say, look, I realise this is important to you. So that's the way to deal with that. But anyway, it's just another one of many, many models that I'm throwing at you. So today I want to look at the context of meetings, all the different types of meetings. I want to look at the structure. I want to look at some ideas to improve your meetings. And these are very practical ideas. I know they work because I've implemented them all over the place. And just a couple of interpersonal skills that might help you in the meeting. So the first thing is, look, getting good at running meetings is one of the most critical and untapped skills of any leader, because the surveys show that we spend approximately about a third of the time, our work time, in meetings. Some of those are planned, some of those are informal, some of them are corridor meetings, but that's a lot of time. And so the question then is, how can we make them more effective? So that's really the rationale of why I've included that. So, I can't read that. I've got that up the top. Oh, right. Yes. It's the other thing I'd say about meetings is that meetings themselves aren't actually, meetings themselves aren't productive. The reason that we have a meeting is to plan what we're going to do after the meeting. So in other words, the proof of the pudding of whether a meeting is effective, as in, things have actually changed, is what happens after the meeting, you see. So this is important to think about. Our meetings should be well run, but what happens after it? Because obviously the reason we're having a meeting is either to report back or maybe to consider a problem or something along those lines. Those things, the proof of the pudding there is really what happens at the end of the meeting. So just something to think about regarding that. Now, I won't bore you with every type of meeting under the sun, but the truth is these categories are, sometimes meetings are to inform people. Sometimes they're to educate people. So you could argue that this meeting today is an education meeting. It could be a meeting to clarify a misunderstanding. It could be a meeting to actually engage the other person in a solution. It could be a meeting to solve a collective problem. It could be a meeting, and we do this regularly, is to review where people are up to. That's a review meeting or review progress. And of course, sometimes we have a meeting to have a group decision. So people involved, you want them to be involved in the decision-making process. I mean, if you're going to make the decision, then you may not need the meeting. You may need to inform people about it, but you may not need to get them involved. So there's a lot of, so I think the first thing is to think to yourself, well, what am I trying to do? What am I actually, what's this all about? Why am I taking time out of my busy schedule? Not just me, but obviously the people I'm meeting with. It's good to get your head around that before you start. Okay. Now, I just want to do a little exercise with you because I think it's quite an eye-opener if you look at the cost of meetings. And both of you could do this very easily. Let me show you how it works. If you look at the average income of your team, and let's go on an hourly basis, so just work that out. How many meetings on average do your team members attend each week? That shouldn't be too difficult to work out. Typically, how long are the meetings? Normally, well, they should be about an hour. That would be my recommendation. Anything longer than that, probably not a good idea. Anything shorter, well, it's possible, but how many in the team, and what are your opportunity costs? What I mean by that is when you and I attend a meeting, we can't do something else, or we shouldn't be doing something else. In other words, you know, we might have a report to write, or we might have something else we need to do. So if we spend an hour in a meeting, then that's actually not an hour of our time. That's 2 hours of our time. And the reason it's 2 hours is not only am I here investing an hour in the meeting, but I'm also not doing something else that I could be doing. So it's quite a costly exercise. So let me give you an example. Let's assume, I'm just picking very modest amounts, let's just talk about $31.25 per hour is the average overall, that's what people would earn. Let's say that people have only 5 meetings a week, which is probably not many. Let's say that each meeting lasts, okay, well, I probably should say 1 hour, but let's say 2. So let's say people are invested in 10 hours a week on meetings. Let's say we've got 6 people in the team, and let's say we've obviously got to double that because, as I said before, they can't do something else. So what do you think the cost might be over a year? Well, I calculated that. 6 people, the cost is $195,000. Now, if that was a line item in a modest budget, you would probably scrutinize that and say, are we getting $195,000 worth of value from our meeting? So you can see that we can actually quantify this. And the other thing is, let's look at a large organization. Let's say we've got 1,000 people and we're using the same figures. Well, what we're talking about there is an annual cost of $32.5 million. And again, you would look at that if you were an accountant and you'd say, okay, well, what's this all about? It's got meetings, $32.5 million. What are we getting value out of this? Of course, the problem we've got is that these things aren't necessarily line items in budgets. And I'm not suggesting they should be. I'm just making us aware that the reason I'm running this session on meetings is we're talking serious costs. And of course they add up, but we don't see them. So it's not about, it's actually not necessarily about reducing the costs. It's more about making sure that the meetings are effective. That's really the key here, because we've got to meet for a range of reasons. So it's not necessarily, so it's quite an eye-opener, isn't it? A couple of things that I think you should think about. and I'll just pause there for a moment. I'm just wondering whether, you've got any questions or comments about that, because these meetings do add up in costs. So by the way, am I coming across loud and clear? Because I've noticed my internet's a little bit slow. Can you hear me, guys?
Yep, no problem.
No problem. Gary, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, mate, not.
No, all right, yeah. So
yeah, not a problem. I can hear.
Gary, in your business, which is a fairly substantial, well, it is a very substantial business, one of the things you might like to do is to, talk to people about, the effectiveness of meetings and the costs of meetings. And it's a bit of an eye-opener, but they wouldn't even be aware of that because they haven't gone through this exercise. So your comment wouldn't be, I don't want you to meet, but your comment would be, well, this is a cost, and make sure that those things are effective. So, because you'd have meetings going on every day, wouldn't you, in your 10 stores?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a substantial cost. So it's just
we are well aware. We are well aware of it, Tim. We're actually breaking it down like out there, but over here to LA, we're going through a lot of our costs, and there's pressure on the business.
Sorry, guys. We've just
another phase of meetings when I get back. So this is right in my hitting zone right now.
Yeah. So Gary, you could easily do a calculation just to show people, and that's that's sobering.
I will.
Yeah. And then just say, look, when I bang on about making these meetings effective, I'm not just saying it because I think it's a good idea. It's costing the business money, and we just need to be aware of that. So that'd be, it might be a good thing to sort of look at there.
I will be. Yeah. Thanks. That's great.
All right, I'll go back. A couple of things I'd like to say about meetings that I think are very important. I've had a number of, particularly people in senior positions, who've said to me, oh, I rotate the chair, and I say, why do you do that? And they say, oh, well, it gives everyone a skin in the game and it gives them a chance to be involved. The truth of the matter is that's not a good idea. And there's a couple of reasons. One is that people probably dread their turn at doing that. So they're probably not likely to be quite as effective as you'd like them to be. And secondly, I think that's a core skill of a leader. And I think if you do that, then you create a situation where the meetings probably won't be that effective. People, I'm not sure they learn a lot from it. And I just say, if you're a leader, you just sit at the head of the table and you chair the meeting. And it's as simple as that. And I think you can still get people engaged. And I'll get through that in a moment and explain how we do that. So that's one thing I would say. Another thing I would say, and I think this is where it comes to the heart of it being a conversation. If you can structure your meetings around 50% reporting and 50% discussion. So the reporting is obviously necessary. You want to know where people are up to. You want to know what's going on. You want to talk about teething issues around reports and so forth. But at the end of the day, if that's all you're doing, you could do that a lot more efficiently than getting everyone off the floor to sit down and have an hour-long meeting. So the question then is, if I go for the 50% discussion, what are we going to talk about? Well, there's so many things. So for example, a simple exercise, you could go round the table and say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you rate us as a team? Now, and why? And just go around the table. Now, that's interesting and insightful. And you might say, well, this is not a commentary about you. I'd like to know about what your perceptions are about how the team's working together. Have a listen to the score, have a listen to the rationale, and you can then summarize at the end of that, and it'd be quite a good thing. Another thing that might be a good exercise, and probably more, Gary, this would be applicable for you, but this is a good exercise. You could actually say to people, if you had to describe this, in your case, store as a color, what would it be and why? If you had to describe this store as an animal, what would it be and why? And if you had to describe this store as a motor vehicle, what would it be and why? Now, apart from having a good laugh, because there'll be a lot of brilliant analogies and metaphors and all the rest of it, you're getting a very good handle on how people see things going. You're actually drawing out really interesting information. And guess what? The themes will be very, very similar. The animal color and the vehicle will be different, but the themes will be the same. You know, they'll be very, very, very common. You might then follow up and say, okay, if we could wave a magic wand, what would the color, animal, and vehicle be? And what do we need to do to get there? You know, so there's a lot of things you can do. And you might say, well, I don't know whether we've got time for that. I think that will make a huge difference, just to give people an opportunity to express their point of view. You get a good discussion happening. I went through the team values charter. You could go through that with your team as well. That's a possibility. So there's so many things you can talk about. Another thing that's very applicable, Jareen, for you and Gary, is when there's a critical incident, right? Something good or something bad has happened. This is ripe for discussion. So you put it on the table, but you put it on the table in the spirit of learning. So you might start by saying, look, this is not pointing fingers of blame. I'm not interested in that. In fact, I don't want any names mentioned. But what I'd be interested in doing is looking at some of the ways we might either learn from something that went really well, or perhaps learn from something that didn't go well. And the psychology with that is that if everyone comes up with solutions, they won't argue with their own data, because they've come up with a solution, but you've got to put it on the table. So there's plenty of opportunities in professional services, which is where Jareen is. There's plenty of opportunities, Gary, in your stores as well for that. Okay. That, as I said, critical incidents should not just be, okay, you might sort them. Obviously, there's two parts to it. When an incident occurs, you've got to solve it. Obviously, that's the first thing. But it's a great source of learning, isn't it? You can bring that into the meeting and say, righto, what did we learn from all this? And you remember the after action review. What went well? What didn't go well? And what would we do differently as a result of what we've learned from what happened? Now, you could run that balance of the meeting on those three questions alone. So use them to your advantage, but just set some ground rules around. We're not pointing fingers of blame here. This is not about blame. You know, this is about how we're going to move forward. Now, the other thing that I think is interesting, and I think this is very applicable for you, Jareen, maybe not so much for Gary, but I would say that there's an assumption that everybody knows what everybody else is supposed to be doing around the table. I think that's a very poor assumption to make, particularly in your case, Jareen, where you're working with clients and you're liaising with a range of different clients and for a range of different things, and there can often be misunderstandings about where something starts and where something finishes. So it's not a bad idea sometimes to clarify roles, and the simplest way of doing that is if you've got someone new to the team, you might actually say to them, can you spend a couple of minutes just talking about how you see your role when we meet next week? I don't want you to give a presentation, just a couple of minutes. Tell us what the key things that are important for you to do your job, and put that on the table. And you could virtually have that happen say you've got 6 people, you could have 6 presentations over 6 meetings. So I think it's easy to underestimate that. And sometimes these roles change and evolve as well. And I think when that happens, that's where misunderstandings occur. So your meetings are great for that. So no reason for that at all, not to do that. I don't know. Sorry, go on.
Can I just run in there just quickly? I believe, because I'm well aware of it because I experienced it, clarifying roles in a team environment is the number one that must be right in any team.
Yeah.
That is the number one priority of any team to be successful.
Yes.
You must know your position, you must know your job, and you've got to do it bloody well.
Yes.
You don't think you can do Tim's job because I think I'll do it better, or I don't do Gary's job or Janine's job. You do your job, and that's your job, that's your role.
Yeah.
And that works so well in team sport, where I'm coming from, as you can imagine.
Yep.
But that's what I do in my business too. You're right, Tim. It probably doesn't really affect me right now, but when it gets down into the lower management, definitely yes. But in my top management team, no, because they are specific positions.
Yes.
But I know you've got a segment, a program on teams, and I'm very keen to do that one if it comes up. But this clarification, mate, this is number one.
This
is the strong message in teams.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think see, if I know what I'm supposed to be doing and I'm working for you, Gary, that's all very good. But if you think I should be doing something else, that's a problem. So in other words, it's not just about getting people to clarify because you're hoping that they know what they're doing, although that's part of it. But it's about everyone else around the table. It's about everybody else understanding what that role is. And I just mentioned that for you, Jareen, because I would imagine that if you're working for, a job for Main Roads, or pick anything where there's a project-based environment, I would imagine that would be very applicable to what we're talking about, because if you don't have a meeting to clarify all that, I'll guarantee there'll be things fall through the cracks. Reports are not done that should be done. You assumed that someone else was going to do something, but they assumed you were. So I just think in a project-based environment, which you're in very much, Jareen, I would say very, very applicable. So yeah, don't hesitate to do that. And the simplest way and the least confronting way, and I think a very affirming way, is to actually ask people what they see as their role in this project. What are the core elements of their responsibility? Now, if you have a view that's different to theirs, then you can discuss that. But at the end of the day, if you don't discuss it, then the problem occurs, and then everyone's pointing fingers and blame and saying, you should have told me, and they say, you should have told me. And it just goes off the rails. Doesn't need to. And I think it's important. The other thing that I did with a team last week, and it was highly effective, what would stop you going around the table and saying, what's the purpose of our team? Now, it's interesting because when you do this, you'll probably get people say, oh, I do this job, or no. What is the core purpose? What's the overarching purpose of why we exist? What are we actually here for? And get everybody to contribute around the table. And you might find that's very insightful as well. Some people will find that hard to answer, and that's the whole reason for doing it. And then, of course, if you don't have to embarrass anyone, if they're just really struggling with that, you can talk to them later, one-on-one, and just say, look, you said something there in a meeting. I just wanted to talk to you about that because I'm not. There's a guy in the United States who wrote a book called Fake Work. I just think that's a brilliant title. Not fake news, fake work. And his argument is that 40% of everything we say, think, and do is fake. In other words, it's got nothing really to do with the overall objectives of what we're there for. And he says you're never going to get that to zero because there's always mindless emails. There's always stuff there that is just going to get in the way. However, he argues, imagine if you could get it down from 40 to 35. Just think about the implications of that. And he argues that if, and he's from the United States, he said, if we could get fake work down from 40 to 35, we wouldn't have a recession. We'd have no problems in the economy. Everything would just be booming. It's thought-provoking, isn't it? So we've got to get people on task as much as we can, and meetings are highly effective for that. All right, let's move on. I don't know how applicable this is, particularly for you, Jareen, but I think there's a lot of value. I think there's a lot of value in standing meetings, well, what they might call stand-up meetings. And I'll tell you why. The reason why they're highly effective is that because people are standing up, we're not going to be wasting a whole lot of time talking about a whole lot of things that don't need to be talked about. This is very, I know, having worked in a lot of manufacturing environments, this is brilliant between shifts, because between shifts, one shift can then brief the second shift on what's going on, what the issues are, what's been happening in the production area, and that just needs to be a stand-up meeting. There's no need to sit down around a table and people get all comfortable and it goes longer than it needs to. So I'm just throwing it in there because I know there's a little trend now out there in industry where stand-up meetings are a great way to start a day or just do a quick debrief. So I'm just throwing it in. It does have some value. People tend to be short and to the point, and you can get a lot of stuff done in a very short amount of time for the very reason that it's a slightly different type of meeting. So something to think about. Now, I don't want to sort of get too bogged down in this, but I think that if it's worth getting a group of people around a table, it's worth having an agenda. In fact, I would argue it's disrespectful, not just to other people, but it doesn't look good for you either. And you might say, yes, but we talk about the same things at every meeting. Well, that's all right, but there's obviously going to be a few variations on that at different meetings. And I think that a couple of tips on this, which I think is really useful. One thing I would say at the top of the agenda that's very, well, the thing that you might say is that start the meeting at a different time. If you're worried about people turning up late and all that sort of stuff, which is a bit of an annoyance, I'd say always start on time. And you know, because if someone strolls in 5 minutes late, you're almost rewarding them and saying, okay, now that you're here, we can start. So it's kind of like, it's not a good tone. It actually reinforces that. But if I start a meeting, if I have a meeting scheduled for 9:45, people start looking at that and go, oh, 9:45, because usually it's 10 or 10:30. But 9:45, it's, oh, that's an interesting time. So just something to think about. What it does is it prompts people to turn up on time because it's a bit more specific, you know, not the top of the hour sort of thing. The other thing is, if you've got all your items, have your most important at the top and your least important at the bottom, so that you can tackle the important things to start with, because people's energy level drops off in a meeting, regardless of whether it's an hour or longer. It does. And the other thing is, if you've got something that's important at the end of the agenda to talk about, then you're going to be rushing through that. So start with the most important to the least important, and then if you run over time, or you can just put those things on the next meeting. The other thing is, under each item, I would have a number, and I would say, so for example, reports, and I might put 20 minutes, brackets. What am I doing? I'm actually saying to the team, we're going to spend 20 minutes on this item. Now, that gives you a great opportunity, because if people are waffling on, it's very easy for you to say, look, we've scheduled 20 minutes for this, so could I ask you to get to the point so we can get this done on time? So it does make your job easier when you put a number next to it. Now, the thing is, if you put 20 minutes there and there's something that's really important to be discussed, and it has to go over 20 minutes, it doesn't mean you have to stop. You can keep going and make that decision. You could basically say, well, look, we've allocated 20 minutes to this, but let's keep talking, and because it's important what we're talking about. So that gives people license to continue. But I think it gives everyone a chance in the meeting to know, what we're trying to do and what time we've allocated. So there's a couple of key things. Don't have general business at the bottom or whatever, or because when you do that, people just sabotage the meeting with stuff that's not even relevant, because there's an opportunity for them to sound off about something. So don't do that. If someone's got something useful to talk about, it should be on the agenda. So I just think when I hear this, does anyone want to bring up anything else? That opens up a can of worms, and then we end up talking about other stuff that's not relevant and all the rest. It might be relevant to that person, but it may not be relevant to you or the rest of the team. So there's some tips on that. Do either of you have any tips that you would like to share that you say, well, I've seen that work and it works really well, just on agendas and organising meetings?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there, mate. We do start from the important thing first down to the least important.
Mm-hmm.
General business in our big meetings, yes, but in our smaller meetings, no.
Yep.
And sometimes that meeting will leave on it feels like it's left on a downer. So when I feel that's the case, I tend to say then I summarize the meeting.
Good.
This is what we spoke about. So they don't go away, oh shit, or stressed, or because the least important sometimes can be emotional too in some cases.
Yeah.
So when it gets to that point, I always summarize what we spoke about.
Yes.
And very briefly on every line, may take 30 seconds.
Yes.
That's all it would take. And so I find that effective.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to cover that a little bit. I'll go through that fairly quickly then. Jareen, any questions or comments for you?
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing with that Gary just said about the summarizing is also the actions and who's doing what is what I usually do at the end of the meeting. I just had a quick question about starting on time. If someone then comes in late and then starts to ask questions about stuff that you've already covered, do you just kind of say, we'll have to, how do you deal with that? I guess it depends on their roles.
Look, as a general rule, Jareen, I would probably say, look, I'll give you a little briefing after the meeting, but I don't want to derail the meeting now by going over old ground. The implication meaning it would have been nice to be on time, because really, I mean, you'll just annoy everyone around the table, and they go, well, why are we going through all this just because? Now, they might have a legitimate reason to be late. I get that. But at the end of the day, it's still not ideal, because the energy will drop the moment you have to respond to that. And I don't think energy being dropped is a good idea. There's a cost involved with that. So, I just say, look, I'll talk to you after the meeting about that. Now, they might say that because they want to know what to contribute to in this point. But, I mean, if you can summarize it quickly, maybe that might be useful. But as a general rule, I don't think it's a good idea to be just going back over old ground because someone or a couple of people have turned up late. It's not ideal. It's not ideal at all. Righto, let's keep going. I've got a few other things here that I think you might find useful. Look, Gary's point is very, very relevant. I like the idea. And, Gary, what I would look at who, certain personalities are good at summarizing. Some people are not good at it. But you've got a detailed person who's a good listener. You know what I'd do? I'd delegate that to them. And I'd just say to them, listen, could you just I'd like you to give a brief summary at the end of the meeting so that we can all walk away knowing exactly what we've talked about. Now, that gives that person a job. Not only that, they're probably better at it than you are if they're that sort of personality that are very good at breaking things up into bite-sized pieces. And the other thing is, you don't have to sort of be too stressed about, oh, I've got to remember this and I've got to summarize that. Get that person to do it. Get them to do the heavy lifting. And then if you've got a couple of people, you can rotate that. It gives them a job. And if you ask the right person, they'll actually be quite chuffed about that. Because you're giving them something that they're very good at. In fact, I might even start by saying to them, listen, you're very good at breaking things down into bite-sized pieces. Would you mind giving a summary of the key points that came out of the meeting today? And then you just defer to them at the end of the meeting. The reason why summaries, and this isn't minutes or anything like that. This is just summary. And the reason that's good at the end of the meeting is for the point that you made earlier, Gary, is that I want people to walk away from the meeting knowing that there are certain things that need to be actioned. And I want people to be on a high. So it wasn't just a talk fest. We've actually got a number of things here we've discussed, and with a number of resolutions. And people walk away saying, well, that obviously there were a lot of things we did in that meeting. Not that they're necessarily done at that point, but there are a lot of things that came out of that meeting. So I 100% agree with what you're saying. And the only variation I'd say is get someone to do that, because you've got enough on your plate just running the show. And I know, they'll be chuffed. They'll appreciate it because they know that you know that they've got a skill set, and why shouldn't they be using it? Which is obviously good. Just an awareness of the energy of meetings. You would know, you would both know this, but at the end of the day, where we have decision fatigue, and what I say is what you both probably realize is if you start with the big fish at the beginning of the meeting, it's better. And then you can end on other things. But the fact of the matter is, as the meeting goes on, the ability to make decisions drops off. And the reason for that is people are tired. And, you could argue, well, maybe it's only an hour, but you're better off making the big decisions at the beginning of the meeting and not the end. And then you can tail off into some of the other things as well. Have a think about that. It's leaving the big decisions to the end is not a good idea. This is, I thought about sharing this with you, and I realized that but it's just something to think about, the way you set up your meetings. And it has a huge impact on what happens. Now, if you look at on the top left-hand corner, that's theatre style. The strength of the theatre style meeting is that this is a good place to convey information. So a shareholders meeting, somebody expert sitting at the top table, that's ideal, but it's not good because the audience aren't expected to interact with each other. So if it's information sharing, theatre style is good. Classroom style is good if it's information sharing and you want people to take notes, because you've got desks in there. That's essentially the difference, right? So that's, again, conveying information. The U shape that you see there on the right-hand side, this is typically what happens when I present in motels. They set it up this way. I don't actually like this shape personally. But the reason why it's good, what the positives are, is that people are a little more, it's discussion. You can see that there's more likelihood of discussion going on around the table because people are looking at each other. So that, if you want people involved, U-shape is a good approach. Conference is the typical one that we use, and it's very good. It's just like U-shape. It's set the differences of sitting around a table. Banquet would be more around a formal presentation, maybe in an evening, and might be a awards night or something, where you're having a dinner as well. So it's obviously a bit of social stuff as well. My personal favorite when I'm running workshops and so forth is the cabaret style. That is having groups sitting around tables, because that way you can do the best of both worlds. You can convey information, but you can also defer to the tables and say, have a talk amongst your team and come back and tell us what you've come up with. So I like that because that's my style, as you probably both know. So I'm just sharing all that because have a think about how you set up your table rooms, and because whatever you set up is going to have a plus going for it, and it'll have a minus going for it. But if you're actually really trying to get interaction, the conference and the cabaret, if it's a bigger meeting, that is, and maybe even the U-shape are ideal. But if you go with the classroom style and the theatre, you won't expect much interaction from people. They're going to just passively sit there and listen. So there's some thought. Now, I'm not in any way
suggesting. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it, Gary.
What do you think in small meetings of people say of about 6 to a dozen of a round table or an oval-shaped table?
Yeah, good. I like round table because it implies that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
It implies that I'm not the only person, because I'd sit at the head of the table if it was a rectangular shape. And it implies that we're all, we've all got a skin in the game here. We're all involved. So I definitely go for that.
Okay.
If you're trying to develop rapport and relationships, actually, that's one-on-one, right? The best is no table. That's just you and them sitting in a chair. And if you do that, there's no barriers there, and you can just chat away, and you'll actually get better interaction around that. So there's a thought as well. So think about those things, because they do make a difference.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay. I'm not suggesting for a minute that you should go out and get an expensive guest speaker like myself or something. But what I think is this is hugely untapped. Think about this for a minute. Some of the people in your teams have got talents and real expertise that if you could encourage them to share that's relevant, of course, it's relevant to what we're talking about. Why wouldn't you ask them to give a short presentation at one of your meetings? So guest speakers don't have to be corporate, it's not. But having said that, I think sometimes getting someone to come in and talk for, and look, if there's something in it for the other person, like, for example, well, they might just enjoy doing that, but there might be, downstream business opportunities. A lot of people will do that with no charge, if there's some possibility there. But getting someone to come in freshens your meetings. It livens it up. It gives another perspective. And sometimes getting someone who's got a provocative point of view about something is actually good, because it gets people thinking differently. So I think both of you, with the people you work with, whether they're employees or whether you're working as in project management, there's people there that have got incredible expertise that you and I don't have. Why wouldn't you ask them to get involved? Don't have to give a big speech. Just talk about this, share, or maybe, and this is where it can work really well, one of them is outstanding at something. So it might be dealing with the public, or it might be, some sort of technical area for you, Jareen. Well, why wouldn't you ask them to, talk about some of the lessons learned? You'll hear a pin drop around the table because, one, you're giving that person the floor, and secondly, you're making them feel good, and thirdly, there's probably a great chance they're going to say some really interesting, insightful things, and they'll take it seriously because they won't want to mess up. So just a thought. It's just a nice way to spruce up your meetings. Now, just before we wrap up, I just want to talk about a couple of interpersonal skills that are outstanding for working in teams. What do you do when somebody won't shut up? You've got someone in your meeting who's very verbose, they dominate the meeting, and that you don't want that. And you and I both know that it's very hard to manage, because if you sound disrespectful, then not only will that person be annoyed, everyone else around the table will probably think, well, that was a bit much, even though they do go on. So what do? The key thing is paraphrasing, and paraphrasing simply means that when someone said something, as soon as they draw breath, say these words. In other words, what you're saying is that you didn't get the right information, and had you had the right information, you would have made a different decision. Now, they've probably gone on, they would have raved on for 15 minutes about that. You can't have that happen. If you jump in, there's three reasons for doing it. One, you can check to make sure you've got the message. That's a good thing. Secondly, you're letting the speaker know that you've heard them. That's a good thing. And thirdly, and this is the key, you can move the meeting on. You don't have to go back over old ground. And in fact, if they start up again, you can just say, look, I heard what you said, and then you just repeat what you said before. So in other words, it's done. They know that you know what's going on. And now I might say something like, well, let's talk about how we're going to fix it so it doesn't happen again. Because it's always about the solution, not just the problem, isn't it? And I think, and that's a respectful way to, shut down the people who just want to dominate a meeting. And let's face it, every meeting has got one of them, at least one or maybe two. Now, what do you do with people who won't speak up? And this is just as problematic, I think. And what I suggest you do is you talk to the quiet ones before the meeting, and you say to them one-on-one, so no one else is around, you say, look, I'd really like to hear a bit more from you in these meetings. I'd like you to contribute a bit more, because I think you've got something valuable to say, and I don't want you to feel as if you don't. And I'm just sharing this with you, not as a criticism, but just as an opportunity for you to share. Now, if you do that, they're going to feel a little bit of pressure, aren't they, to speak up? And that's a good thing, because I know introverts sometimes find it difficult to speak up in meetings, but the truth of the matter is I want everyone contributing. And if I don't do that, they might think just sitting there quietly is fine. Well, it's not, because they're not listening, but they're not contributing. The other thing you can do is, once you've done that, in your meetings, it's perfectly okay for you to say, Bill, is there anything you wanted to add to what's already been said? Or Mary, is there anything you want to say that hasn't been said already? Now, Bill or Mary can sit there and say no, but think about the psychology of this. Everyone else around the table thinks, gee, I better say something, otherwise Gary or Jareen, they're going to ask me any minute. So I'm actually going to contribute something here. And the challenge for both of you is to get everybody to contribute in a fairly even way across, in a meeting. If you can do that, you are definitely doing well. It's a challenge in any meeting. Yeah. The team values charter is something you can run. And I am still staggered at how incredibly effective this is. I mean, I did it for a reason, but I found that it works extremely well. You get your team together, and I would imagine that this would work well in any context. So you say to everyone, you don't ask people to answer these questions before the meeting, because inevitably someone won't do it, and then you've got to stop and wait for them to do it. So don't just hit them up with it in the meeting. You might have on your agenda team values charter, but you say, and this is the question, what's one value that's important to you when we meet? And everyone writes down a value. So, for example, I might write down the word respect, just one word. And then when everyone looks up, you say, write down what it means. And then I might say respect means that my point of view is listened to. And then you might say, then you ask the question, why is it important? Well, I want to feel as if I'm respected when I'm working in this team. And here's where the rubber meets the road. What behaviours would demonstrate that value? And then I might say, well, not interrupting me, particularly when you disagree with me, would be a good sign of respect. And then when everyone's written all that down, and I can guarantee it'll only take you about 15 minutes to get that done, you go round the table and you ask everyone to contribute. And you start with yourself, and I'll tell you now, it's highly effective, because what you're actually doing is you're asking people to tell you and everybody else, how do they want to be treated? And who could argue with that? And then what you do is and I strongly believe you publish that as a charter. This is our value, and this is what it means, which is the second question. What does it mean? That you don't need to worry about the third and the fourth question on the charter. And let's say that somebody is doing something that's probably not ideal. Instead of thinking, how am I going to express this? Why couldn't you just say to them, do you think that the way you spoke to so-and-so was consistent with our team values charter? And get them to evaluate it themselves. Now, if let's say it's a customer and this person was, clearly out of line, hopefully they'll connect the dots and say, no, I probably didn't follow through on the customer focus part. Well, that's highly effective. You've got them, and you've used the charter to keep your team on purpose. And again, the charter's theirs. It's not, you didn't design it. It's all about them. And I am staggered at how incredibly effective it is. I've done this with big tough homicide detectives in QPS. I've done this with more touchy-feely type organisations, and I can guarantee it works everywhere, because, as I said, the heart of it is, how do you want to be treated? And we will treat you accordingly. The quid pro quo is that you will treat everyone else according to the values that we have in this charter. So it galvanizes the team around, it's almost like a scaffolding around the team. This is how we operate. And it works really, really well. So I'd highly recommend that to you if you're trying to bring a little bit of unity and purpose and all the rest of it to the team. So that's that. And I think, I think the big one, the big takeaway, and I'd be interested to hear whether you do this, but I would always start my meetings with a win for the week. Go around the group, assuming it's a weekly meeting, of course. Go around the group, start with yourself and say, my win for the week is I've just done X. Doesn't have to be the Nobel Peace Prize or anything. It's just something that people... now, the first time you do this, everyone will look at you very strangely, because, and worse still, they can't think of anything. And that's a problem. So if you do it for the first meeting, it'd be like pulling teeth. You do it for the second meeting, it'll be still a little bit more difficult. And then the third meeting, everyone will come along with their win for the week. And some of those wins may not be necessarily work-related, and there's nothing wrong with that. It can be something that happened. My son won a medal at footy, or daughter won, something at ballet, or whatever it might be. And it starts the meeting in a positive. And not only that, you're in a position then where you can capitalize on those wins, because a lot of people aren't willing to blow their own trumpet in any way, shape or form. It's great. And it only takes 5 minutes, and it creates an upward spiral of positivity. And I think that's important. So I think we're just about there. So, look, my view is just try. Look, I don't know. I've thrown a lot at you there, but I think the point is, if something resonated there, go for it. You don't have to implement them all. So any questions at this stage, comments, observations before we wrap up?
No, thanks, Tim. There was some I've written down some notes here. Obviously, you've probably sent me writing down, which is great. There's some great things there, and even that last one. I don't do it all the time, but when I feel the need for it, just to break the ice, sort of thing. One of the best ones, one of the best questions I asked. It wasn't a win. It was, if you had one chance, one opportunity anywhere in the world to go and see your favorite event, whether it be theatre, sport, whatever it may be, what would it be? And and who would you take with you if you take one person?
Wow.
And that really gets them thinking, and sometimes it throws them off, and like you say, then they come back and they're in a different mindset, and that's where the quieter ones then I find open up a little bit more. Just that simple thing. So that you're right, it's very effective, very strong.
I'd just say that if you started every meeting with a win for the week, and you can that happening through all your stores, I will guarantee to you the vibe will be upbeat, and it's just the way we do things around here at McDonald's. We just do it, and we all, how we start. Often in other workplaces we have safety incidents and people go around it's the same deal. It's just a positive thing, and I think, Jareen, if you're working on a project, I can see that's applicable around that, because there might be little bits and pieces that are occurring along the way that maybe people might think are very relevant, but because they bring them up, it's good to hear. It takes 5 minutes, and then you move into the agenda. And in fact, I'd have that as item number 1, win for the week. And then item number 2 is whatever the most important thing is, and you just go down the list there. And then if you have your summary at the end and you get someone else to do that, you're going to have a good meeting. There's no doubt. Yeah.
Love it. Like it. Yeah. Thanks, mate.
No worries. Thanks, Jareen. Thanks, Gary. We'll catch you next week. All the best.
Thanks, Tim.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya. Bye, Gary.